A top-tier SRAM XXSL Eagle Transmission group set will run you more than $2,000, and that's before you've bought a bike to put it on. Shimano's answer, the XTR Di 29200, is only a few $100s cheaper. For that money, you are not buying gears. Bicycles have shifted chains across cassettes since the 1930s using little more than a spring and a cable. What you're actually buying, whether either brand will say it out loud or not, is a seat inside one of two walled gardens. And once you're in, getting out is a lot more expensive than getting in. Most people who follow this rivalry think it's like Ford versus Chevy, a matter of taste, maybe a little tribal loyalty passed down from whoever built your first bike, or whichever brand your local shop happens to stock. Pick a side, argue about it at the trailhead, and it doesn't really matter because both companies make good stuff. Online forums treat it almost like a sports rivalry, camps forming around which derailleur cage looks tougher or which shifter clicks with a more satisfying sound. That's the comfortable version of the story, the one where this is really about engineering preference and nothing else. The uncomfortable version is that this isn't really a rivalry about who shifts better. It's a rivalry about who can lock you in first, and the shifting itself, remarkable as it's gotten, is almost incidental to that. To understand how we got here, you have to go back further than either wireless derailleur. Shimano was founded in 1921 in Sakai, Japan, originally making freewheels, the ratcheting mechanism that lets a bike coast. For most of the 20th century, it had no real global competitor in derailleur gearing, quietly becoming the default equipment on everything from department store bikes to the fastest road bikes in the world. By the time Shimano introduced STI, its combined brake and shift lever, in 1990, it had already reshaped how an entire generation of cyclists interacted with their bikes, without most of them ever thinking twice about who made the parts moving under their hands. SRAM didn't exist until 1987, and it didn't start in derailleurs at all. It started in Chicago with a product called Grip Shift, a twist grip shifter aimed at mountain bikers who wanted something faster than Shimano's trigger levers. Shimano, understandably threatened, spent much of the following decade in patent disputes with the upstart, some of which SRAM won, some of which it didn't, but the fight itself tells you something. Even in the early 90s, before either company had sold a single electronic group set, this was already less about who made the best shifter and more about who controlled the mechanism. For years, SRAM was the scrappy American challenger, nibbling at the edges of a Japanese monopoly. Nobody seriously called it a rivalry yet. That took electronics. Shimano got there first, and it was clumsy. Dura-Ace Di2, launched in 2009, was the first mainstream electronic road group set, and it worked by wire. A battery tucked in the frame, cables running to each derailleur, no twisting cable housing to stretch or freeze up in cold weather. It was a genuine leap for road racing. 5 years later, Shimano brought the same wired electronic idea to mountain bikes, and this is where the cracks started to show. Off-road, wires get pinched, snagged, and soaked. Mechanics who'd spent decades happily bleeding brakes and cutting cable housing now had to route a tangle of electronic wiring through a bike frame never designed for it, along with a separate battery and display unit. It worked mostly, but it was fussy. And fussy is expensive to service. SRAM watched this happen and did something smarter than trying to out-engineer the wires. In 2019, it skipped the wired step entirely and launched the XX1 Eagle AXEs, the first fully wireless 12-speed mountain bike drivetrain, followed almost immediately by the wireless Red ETAP AXS on the roadside. No wires at all, just a battery on the derailleur and a radio signal from the shifter. It was a real leap over Shimano's approach, and for the first time, SRAM wasn't the budget alternative. It was setting the pace. Then came 2023, and this is the moment the whole relationship changed, because SRAM didn't just improve the derailleur. It got rid of the part of the bike the derailleur used to hang from. Every bike since the 1980s had a derailleur hanger, a small sacrificial piece of metal bolted to the frame that bent or snapped in a crash, so your actual frame didn't. SRAM's Eagle Transmission threw that idea out and mounted the derailleur directly to the frame through a new standard it pushed hard called the UDH, the Universal Derailleur Hanger. Combined with a wireless shifting and a system that could shift gears even while you were mashing the pedals at full power, uphill, under load, it was a genuine mechanical advance. not just a marketing refresh. Riders and mechanics who'd used both generally agree the transmission shifts under hard effort in a way older systems simply can't. Shimano did not have an answer for more than 2 years. That's an eternity in a product category that used to see a new flagship group set roughly every 4 to 6 years. When Shimano's response finally arrived, the XTR Di2 it went fully wireless for the first time, matching what SRAM had already had on the market since 2019. Riders who've spent real time on both, swapping between an SRAM Eagle Transmission and a pre-production XTR 9200 across mountain terrain in places like the Welsh Marches and the Pyrenees, tend to report the same thing. SRAM's transmission still edges ahead on raw shifting precision under hard load, while Shimano's derailleur is slimmer, less prone to getting knocked around by rocks and roots, and, notably, comes in around $500 cheaper than SRAM's equivalent flagship. So if you're just weighing sticker price and headline features, Shimano looks like the value pick and SRAM looks like the performance pick. That's the surface-level story most gear reviews leave you with. Here's the layer underneath that most of those reviews don't dig into. None of it is compatible with any of it. A SRAM Eagle transmission shifter will not talk to a Shimano derailleur. A Shimano 12-speed cassette will not work with a SRAM 12-speed chain. Once you buy into one ecosystem at the level of shifters, derailleurs, cassettes, and chains, you're not just choosing a preference, you're closing a door. There's some flexibility at the edges. Plenty of riders run a SRAM crankset alongside a Shimano drivetrain, or mix and match brake calipers and rotors with some care. But the actual mechanism that moves your chain across gears has to come entirely from one company or the other. That's not a coincidence, and it's not really an engineering limitation either. Proprietary electronics, proprietary firmware, and in SRAM's case, a whole new frame mounting standard, all quietly make sure that once a bike brand builds a model around one group set, or once you personally invest $2,000 into one, switching brands means replacing the entire drivetrain. Not just a part of it. It's not only the shifting mechanism either. Swap in a new SRAM cassette, and you'll likely need a freehub body called XDR, a standard SRAM controls. Shimano's higher range cassettes increasingly require their own proprietary freehub called Microspline, introduced specifically because SRAM's wide-range Eagle cassettes had started making Shimano's older standard look outdated. Neither standard talks to the other, and neither is optional if you want the full gear range. Either company advertises on its flagship cassette, so the lock-in doesn't stop at the derailleur and shifter. It reaches all the way down into the hub laced to your wheel, a part most riders never think about replacing at all until a shop mechanic tells them their new cassette simply won't fit the wheel they already own. The road side of the sport tells a similar story, just with a longer runway. Shimano's Dura-Ace Di2 has been the default electronic group set under professional road racers for the better part of 15 years, ever since that first wired version in 2009. SRAM spent most of that time playing catch-up on the road, the way it once had in mountain biking, until Red ETAP AX arrived wireless in 2019 and gave professional road teams a genuine alternative for the first time in a generation. The pattern repeats itself with almost comic precision. Shimano establishes the category SRAM waits, then leapfrogs it with a wireless version before Shimano can respond. And each leapfrog resets which ecosystem a professional team, and by extension, the amateur riders who buy what the pros ride, gets funneled into. That lock-in shapes more than just your next repair bill. It shapes what bikes get built in the first place. A bike company designing a new frame has to decide early whether it's compatible with a SRAM's direct mount transmission standard, Shimano's more traditional hanger-based mounting, or both, and that decision ripples down to which group set gets spec'd on the showroom floor, which in turn shapes which brand your local shop stocks parts for, which in turn shapes which system your mechanic actually knows how to service quickly. You, as the rider, end up nudged toward an ecosystem well before you've consciously chosen one, just by what happened to be on the bike you liked, the size that fit you, or the color that caught your eye in the shop window. Ask most riders which group set ecosystem they're in, and they'll tell you without hesitation. Ask them why they ended up there, and most of the time, the honest answer has nothing to do with a side-by-side comparison of shifting performance. It has to do with whatever bike was in stock the week they were ready to buy. And here's the part that's easy to miss if you only pay attention to the flagship group sets everyone reviews. One industry comparison of the two companies noted that SRAM has been rolling out new product lines at close to twice the pace Shimano has in recent years. On paper, that sounds like great news for riders, more innovation, faster progress, but a faster release cadence in a proprietary closed ecosystem also means your $2,000 drivetrain is further from the cutting edge sooner, and the aftermarket parts, cassette bodies, freehub standards, chain widths keep shifting under you too. Weight, the other number every reviewer loves to quote, tells a similar story once you actually sit with it. SRAM's own mechanical Eagle transmission variants weigh in somewhere around 2,000 to 2,300 grams, depending on configuration, while a comparable Shimano setup can come in close behind, or even a touch lighter once you account for the crankset. The gap between them, in most real comparisons, amounts to well under 100 grams, roughly the weight of a granola bar, in exchange for a price difference that can run into the hundreds of dollars. That's not nothing if you're racing for a podium finish, measured in seconds. But for the overwhelming majority of riders paying that premium, it's closer to buying the badge than buying the performance. Meanwhile, Shimano's mechanical XT group set, largely unchanged in its current form for roughly 6 years now, still gets praised by reviewers for being remarkably durable and cheap to maintain, with individual cassette cogs replaceable for just a few dollars each, rather than swapping the whole cluster. The venerable, slow-moving option isn't obsolete. In a lot of real-world cases, it's actually the smarter buy. It just doesn't win headlines the way a fully wireless, hangerless flagship does, because reliable and cheap to fix has never once sold a bike show floor demo. So which one is actually better? Here's the honest answer, and it's not the one either marketing department wants you to walk away with. If you race enduro or ride terrain, where you need to shift gears while standing on the pedals at maximum effort, the testing consensus is fairly consistent. SRAM's transmission system handles that specific situation better than anything Shimano currently makes, and the direct mount frame standard genuinely does survive rock strikes and crashes that would have bent a traditional derailleur hanger. If you want a drivetrain that's cheaper up front, easier and less expensive to keep running for years, and built on parts your average shop mechanic has serviced 1,000 times over, Shimano, especially in its mechanical XT or SLX tiers, remains the more sensible choice for a huge share of riders who will never once need to shift under a full sprint effort anyway. If you're a weekend gravel rider putting on maybe 2,000 miles a year, the wireless flagship from either brand is largely solving a problem you don't have, and a mid-tier mechanical group set from either company will serve you just as well for a fraction of the cost. Neither of those conclusions is really about which company is better. They're about which company's specific trade-offs match how you actually ride, and how much you value not thinking about your drivetrain at all between services. If you've ever tried mixing components from both brands on the same bike and had it just work, I'd genuinely like to hear about it in the comments, because for most riders trying that today, it doesn't. And that's worth knowing before you build your next bike, rather than after. The uncomfortable truth underneath all of it is that this rivalry has never really been driven by what's best for the person pedaling. It's been driven by two companies racing each other to see who can make switching away from them more expensive and more inconvenient, and dressing that race up as relentless innovation. That doesn't make either group set bad. Both are genuinely well-engineered pieces of equipment built by companies with real decades-long expertise. But the smartest move for most riders isn't chasing whichever flagship just launched, it's figuring out which ecosystem your bike, your budget, and your local mechanic are already built around, and only upgrading past that when the specific thing the new system does better is something you'll actually use on the trail. There's another layer to this same story sitting on the roadside of cycling, where the ecosystem lock-in gets even more expensive, and that's exactly where we're headed next.